It's 2:13 p.m. on Friday, the 5th of October, 2012. I'm Mark Strassman, reporter with Utopia News. I'm about to talk to Peter Meisen, who's the director of GENI, the Global Energy Network Institute in San Diego. Welcome back to Utopia News.
Good to see you again, Mark.
We're going to talk about two studies about wind power that have just come out, but before we do that, just give a small blurb about GENI and what it does.
The GENI Institute has been around 25 years now. Our main focus is on a specific energy strategy that was proposed many, many years ago by a man named Buckminster Fuller, most well known for geodesic domes. It was his premier strategy for the planet, so this was no small initiative, and it has to do with the core, born from the core question, how do you provide a decent living standard for everybody sustainably? We'll take you through a Q&A, but the number one answer to that question was clean energy for everybody. You and I have plenty of energy, Mark, but it's not clean. There's still 1.5 billion people on the planet that have none. The number one answer to that question was to link power grids, link grids, essentially the freeway for electricity, between countries globally, tapping renewable resources that are abundant around the world but aren't always local to where you and I live. So build your wind farms, your solar farms, your geothermal in an optimal location, feed that into a transmission system so that whenever you flip a switch in whatever city or industry, you're getting a clean electron rather than a dirty one.
I'll give a small plug to Jeremy Rifkin, who's written a book called The Third Industrial Revolution, in which he suggests the same approach and argues that it'll transform society everywhere.
It will, because it has huge benefits. And real quickly, there are 4 or 5 primary benefits. The more you start to interconnect neighboring countries across borders 24/7, you now have an ongoing daily trading relationship with your neighbor. If you go way back to Naisbitt's book and Megatrends in the 90s, he says it's just bad business to shoot your customer or your supplier with your most fundamental requirement of electrical energy. So it's a driver for trade, cooperation, and peace. So there's really an economic and geopolitical benefit to that. You get people electricity the first time that don't have them. They literally start using it for water systems and clearly just lighting and refrigeration. So it gets people out of poverty. The idea is to get them up to 2,000 kilowatt hours per capita per year. You and I have around 12,000 on average. You get them from up to 2,000. You'll get them out of basic poverty and then into the economic game. So this is a development proposal for those 1.5 billion people that don't have none. Now, they're not going to use a long-distance transmission high-voltage system initially. They're going to use small, decentralized systems initially to get that village, those first few kilowatt hours per person. You get people electricity for the very first time, and what you do start to see is a relationship between energy availability and birth rates. As energy becomes available to a new society, birth rates go down proportionally, and it goes way back to you don't need these insurance births when the kids aren't dying anymore, and this is a population stabilizer, and you can look at some studies on that one, and those are borne out. The other big one on this is if you're tapping renewables instead of fossil fuels, it's a main driver to get us off of really fossil fuels around the world for power production. This is an environmental proposal and one of the most important ways to make the transition from a fossil-dominated world to one that's really run by renewables. So those are the 4 huge benefits from this simple statement called linking renewable resources around the world. That's been our work for the last 25 years.
Okay, well, that's a good general vision. Now, we've got some specific developments in the area of wind power. Tell us about these 2 studies that have just come out.
Yeah, these are great reports, and they came back to back. I think one from the gentleman out of Berkeley, I want to remember his name, Samuelson, I believe, and then there was one really out of I think it was Nature, the National Academy of Sciences. Both of them came up with essentially the same conclusion, that there's this huge abundance of renewable wind potential on the planet that goes for the asking. One came up with 10 times the needs of the world. The other one came up with 20 times the needs of the world. In either case, 10 or 20 times our current installed capacity is a way over potential than we could ever use or need. And I didn't get into the studies that deeply, but usually that has to do with how high in the atmosphere they want to put that turbine, that nacelle. Are they looking at all onshore, offshore? So we did some. You saw some of the visuals on this, but much of this very rich resource is right along the shores of many of the continents around the world, because that's where you have that interface between land and ocean. It's not a bad place to capture it because many people live right along shorelines. So there, what you're obviously going to do is look for your optimal wind resources where you have your class 5, 6, 7 winds on an ongoing basis all year long. That's what any good analysis would do, is say, where am I getting my best wind resource for 365 days, or the most number of hours in a day, and then look at the capacity of that particular region, build that out to that capacity, and then either put it into the existing grid that's close by, or you have to then extend the transmission grid to get that power to market.
Now, how do these findings about wind availability and potential fit in with the GENI overall vision?
Well, it's right in line with what we've been talking about for the last couple of decades. It's always been the assertion that there's plenty of renewable on the planet for everybody forever. And if you look at the solar studies coming from the International Solar Energy Society or the United States National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado, they all have outstanding maps now of the solar potential of the southwestern desert of the U.S., of the northern desert of Africa, the Gobi Desert of China. And if you just put a simple square, draw a square that's 400 miles on a side on any one of those deserts, there's enough solar radiation that hits that footprint to power all of the needs of the world with just 3% of the world's deserts. So that's another validation of there is no lack. The myth of there's not enough renewable to meet the needs is just a myth. So that's the solar side of this. We just talked about the wind being somewhere between 10 to 20 times our current requirements. You would never just use wind or just use solar, because both of them are intermittent by nature. They are, but they fit nicely together in concert. So you would have one for, and I'm going to suggest you include other renewables as well. A good baseload generation would be geothermal. For example, all the way around the Pacific Rim or places in the Mediterranean where you use geothermal, you can use that for baseload generation 24/7. Then where your wind is blowing, that can be your intermediate need in the middle of the day, and obviously the peak best can come from the solar potential anywhere around the world.
So there's an embarrassment of riches both in solar and wind and and we're not going to talk about geothermal, but for wind and solar, there's an overcapacity.
Way over what we could ever use or need. That's right, and the Earth really is an energy machine if you think about it in that way. The fact that we have these the sun is our ultimate engine and provides this potential that we talk about, but by the fact that we have high and low pressures between the land and the ocean created by the Earth spinning and the day and night changes, you have all of these consistent winds that are always circling the Earth. There will always be that wind resource there, just as there will always be the solar resource there. So why not harvest that, if you will? When you harvest something, you're not taking anything away from the long-term capacity of that engine. You're just using its income energy. So that's the concept here, is literally put your technology in the way of that moving resource. In the sunshine, it happens to be photons. When you're talking about wind, it happens to be moving pressures from high to low pressures. But if you just harvest those renewable natural resources, there's more than enough for everybody forever. And instead of digging something out of the ground, that obviously is a messy process. The transportation is a messy process. The refining is expensive. The burning of it causes all sorts of atmospheric pollution. And in the case of some of these resources really toxic resources. So why don't we just start using Mother Nature's resources that are renewable and massively abundant, than opposed to digging something out of the ground that is only going to last another century or two, they say. And if that's the case, let's keep it banked for future generations when we have so much potential on the wind and the solar side.
Okay, well, this seems like an obvious transition that we need to make, but it hasn't happened yet. What are the financial, political, and aesthetic barriers to making this happen?
Well, I'm going to say it is happening, so we can't say it's not. It's just not happening at the speed and scale, clearly, that you and I might like. Wind and solar are the two fastest growing energy resources on the planet today in the last several years. 30 to 50% growth rates, meaning you will double those installed capacities every 2 years. So that's huge growth rates for an industry. Now, you can grow fast when you have a small installed capacity. That's just the nature of faster growth from a smaller installed base. So that's an important realization, is that they are growing out. These are commercial facilities. You have China, the United States, India, Germany leading this charge around the world. It's not broad enough in every country, but you have 5 major regions, major countries that are driving this. They're doing it with tax incentives in some cases, renewable portfolio standards and others. There are government programs that are helping to jumpstart these industries. I was just reading in the New York Times this morning the interesting part about China's rapid development in the solar sector. They've overdeveloped their solar manufacturing capacity and supported it, if you will, too strongly from the government side. And you'll recall they were dumping some of those solar cells into America, which caused some of our own companies not to be able to compete and went bankrupt over the last year. So there's going to be a fallout in this industry, and I know the Obama administration did put an increased tariff on some of those solar cells coming from China or at least they asked for through the World Trade Organization. You have some shakeout of an industry in these early days, and we're still in the early days. The shift has been too slow, though, if you want to get ahead of climate change. Everybody has seen that Earth at Night map from NASA. It's a beautiful map from outer space where it shows the lights from outer space on a completely dark night. It looks like those lights essentially over people have power. And the problem is it used to be just 3% of those lights last decade came from wind, solar, and geothermal. Today it's 4%. So there has been a 1-point increase in a decade, which is on the scale at 30 and 40% growth rates. That's exciting, but nowhere near the potential of what we could be doing, and that's the work that we engage in. There are certainly incentives that are supportive of this. The challenge right now for the wind industry, you say, what are some of the hurdles? There's a production tax credit that the wind industry gets. It's about 2.2 cents for every kilowatt hour. That has been seesawed as a benefit to wind developers on and off from our federal Congress over the last year, and it's going to expire again on January 1st unless it is renewed. So all of the developers are working to finish their project by the end of this year, but projects scheduled for 2013 have disappeared because there's no certainty for the developers of these projects. So that's really a major problem for anybody that's an investor or developer. They want certainty in their policy, and we don't give that to them in the United States all the time.
Well, what can we do to raise public awareness of the importance of moving to a sustainable system as opposed to the one that's going to run out?
I think it always begins with an educational process. So just discussions like this are a part of that. We are clearly many who are working on this around the world today. We are one of those organizations that's been around a long time, the GENI initiative, that's GENI.org. We continue to push that, and our work right now goes country by country with our reports that we're publishing. We've realized we can talk about the big issues of climate change. We can talk about the potential, like we have of the wind potential in the world. But it really boils down to what can an individual country do within their borders, because that's where the decision makers are. So,
here in the United States, the legacy fossil fuel people have a lot of power over the legislature. What could we do about that?
What we are doing is you go on country by country, and in our example, we have reports that we've done recently. We've had students from all over the world this last summer doing research on how individual countries should be 100% renewable by 2020 if they had to. And the whole goal of those reports were to do this assessment nation by nation, not globally like we just talked about for the wind, but on a national basis. Let's look at each nation's wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, hydro, and ocean energy potential. There's 6 renewables. Look at that resource potential. Look at how much capacity they have installed today, and then ask the question: could they keep the lights on with just the renewables that they have within their country today, or in their neighboring nations? Because we do talk about, obviously, the thing is to interconnect with their neighbors, with their transmission system. And in every single case, the United States, China, India, Argentina, Turkey, Chile. Every single one of these reports shows that all of them have more than 100% renewable potential that they could tap today if they wanted to. So then what we do is we take those reports and market them both on a push-pull basis. We get them out directly to the 40 top decision makers in those countries. Clearly, we put search engine optimization of those reports on our website. The whole goal is to get those countries that I mentioned, there's another dozen that we're going to be published soon, to get those decision makers in those countries doing this research for themselves, for them to ultimately wake up and go, oh my gosh, we really could keep all the lights on from renewables if we wanted to. Now, the reason, Mark, that we put a 2020 deadline on that, which is really almost an impossible speed deadline for this kind of transition, the reason we did it is there's a report, we talked about it maybe a few months ago from the IEA that said if you don't change the course of CO2 has been increasing 3 parts per million every year for the last 50 years. Right now, I believe it's 393 parts per million, headed to 450. The smartest guys say we're headed to 450, and Bill McKibben and others, and Dr. Hansen, is if we don't go back to 350, the society that we will have going forward for us and our children will have dire consequences from weather events. We've seen pretty extreme weather events. So the goal of putting that deadline of 2020 on these reports is to say if there was a definitive commitment or a definitive event that caused these nations to go, man, we got to make this transition fast, we're starting to give them roadmaps on how you would do that.
Well, the recent climate events that have been taking place here in Southern California, if nowhere, and throughout North America, the drought and the heat, has that been enough to spur more activity? You know,
I wish I'd have seen that in this latest round of policy statements by the parties, because we're in a political season right now. You'd think that would somehow show up in either their energy statements on either side, and I have to say I'm disappointed. What most of those platforms talk about is we need to explore all forms of energy,
right.
And that certainly includes fracking right now. That, natural gas prices are way down because we've started to frack our country dramatically. We're going underground 5 miles to crack shale and extract that natural gas. So we have an abundance of natural gas in the system, and at the same time polluting a whole new set of water resources that we really don't know the long-term consequence. And some people are really having a pushback on that natural gas development. There's still a major voice out there from the coal industry talking about clean coal. Now,
well, it's not just the coal industry. It's Mitt Romney who says during the debate and today said we'll take the coal and we'll burn it cleanly.
I know,
but he's making it up. it's an oxymoron.
It really is. I don't know how you put those two words together and keep a straight face. I suppose you can with good scrubbers, and we do have that technology in the United States today that scrubs out all of the NOx and the SOx and the particulate matter out of a coal-fired power plant. It's exhaust, but you can't take out the CO2 yet. There is no carbon sequestration at any of these power plants. There's a few in the world, but nowhere in the United States of any scale. So we essentially throw away this CO2, which EPA is now called a pollutant. You can't throw things out of your car without a consequence, but you can throw away CO2 into the atmosphere at no cost whatsoever. And the long-term consequences are, I think we're starting to see them today, where we thought they would be maybe at the end of our lifetime, or the scientists where we're saying we're going to see extreme weather events, we're going to see hotter hots and more droughts, we're going to see more floods, these 100-year floods more often. Go talk to Pakistan and Australia about 100-year floods happening back to back. Look at the Midwest and Russia these last couple of years where they just bake dry in the summer season. So we are seeing these consequences today. The northern Arctic North Pole has shrunk to its smallest level ever this year, and it will expand again as the winter comes along, but not as deep and won't be as broad. So some of those people say the North Pole ice pack may disappear in a few years rather than in 10 or 20 years. That's a scary prospect because now you have all of that ocean absorbing even warmer water, even because it's dark. Right. So there's bad feedback.
Right, and let's not even talk about the permafrost melting. So.
Yeah, there's so many feedback loops that are negative in their consequence. So that's why we say, how do we do this at speed and scale? And I think we go back to starting with education, then you have to get political commitment.
But on the political side, during the debate, Governor Romney criticized the president for putting $90 billion into renewables, and the president sat there like a fish. There was no defense of a green policy. Yeah, he didn't defend it, and I think the number was inflated from candidate Romney. I believe it was more like 60 billion. Still a big number. It was 10 times. It was a 10-fold increase over what DOE would normally be able to spend. And they got this through the stimulus. That's why, at least in my neighborhood, everybody now in this utility has smart meters. I'm not sure about you, but smart meters win on homes around the country because of that stimulus. And those now enable a whole bunch of people to really monitor on a very personal basis their usage and be more cognizant of prices. So you've launched a better defense of that money than the president did. And I'm just trying to see one more time how we can get policymakers to change their attitudes.
I think part of it is you make an argument for these that this is a patriotic thing to do and it's about jobs. And so we've been pushing this as much as we can. I don't think we're the only ones. Certainly you got to give T. Boone Pickens some credit. He had his, I forget the name of it, the Pickens plan. I liked half of it. I don't like the other half. He was a very strong wind advocate and invested in wind farms in Texas and in the Midwest. He was also an advocate for gas because that's what his company is involved in. But he said, let's harvest this wind resource that we have in America, and here's the argument. It's domestic energy. We've got just in America, we have 3 to 4 times the wind potential in the Midwestern states, Texas all the way up to Montana, than we could ever use or need for just American energy. So there's a myth of there not being enough. And the ranchers in Texas, the farmers in Iowa love them. You put in a turbine, you get long-term income from it, from leasing that plot of land or getting a wheeling rate for that transmission line. So it's a new additional income beyond the cows and beyond growing corn. So these people are really embracing this technology in the Midwest. So it's domestic energy, keeping it's jobs in the United States, and oh, by the way, it's less CO2. So there's a win-win-win in every aspect of these renewables, wind and solar and geothermal. I think that's the argument that really speaks so loudly to both parties, and keeps money circulating domestically as opposed to going to some offshore or foreign organization that is selling us energy that maybe doesn't like us.
Okay, so you've made the argument, and the need now is to make sure that it gets to the people who can make the decisions, and ultimately in a democracy, that's the people of the United States. So we hope that I hope that our conversation has helped move that discussion forward a little bit more. I want to thank you for your time and your efforts, and for talking to us about them today on Etopia News.
Mark, I was glad to join you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.